Hey there! Welcome to part 2 of the race conversation. In this video, we will dive deeper into the topic of race. As always, please listen with an open mind and be looking to learn something new. Enjoy.
Okay, so Micah 6:8 talks about do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. What does do justice and love mercy mean in a conversation about race and racial reconciliation? And if you really want to contextualize it, what does it mean in Rexdale Alliance Church context? What does it mean when we're talking about race to do justice and to love mercy? Colleen, you're not here to defend yourself, so I'm going to make you go first. Any thoughts?
In the context of Rexdale Alliance Church, I guess that word being a project, like a people group as a project, I guess, that I would just want our fellow congregants to understand that we have something to bring to the table. So it's not just always need. Like, we have a lot to give. There's a lot to be learned from us as a people group. Like, I was so happy that time when we had the Parade of Nations, if anybody remembers that, at Rexdale. And so there are so many different cultures and people groups. So what I'm really trying to say is that not all Black people are a project. Like, we have so much to bring to the table. And if they could just see us through those eyes, like, and circling back to the whole justice, love, and mercy, just see us how Jesus would see us. Give each one a chance to show how they can be productive in the church and not just be Black people who need help. They need help. Yeah, we all need help, but I mean, we all have some to give to. So just see us just the way how Jesus would see us.
Wow, I feel like, because this is a church, we should just stop there. That was really good. See each other how Jesus sees each other. But I'm going to keep going. Anybody want to jump in on that? What does justice and mercy look like in race and specifically in Rexdale Alliance Church context? Denise, you look like you got something to add here.
Oh, yeah. I would say, as Colleen says, the church has been good at doing different outreaches in the community, which is showing love and mercy, right? So we are, using our means to help others. But I think the next step in terms of justice is, it's right now the world is not equal. So what are we doing as people of God to help that and to address those injustices that are at the different levels in society, right? So instead of just giving, handouts, we need to go and fight, in a good way, but to stand up for people in the courts, in the housing, in all these different areas. That's going to help people, empower them to be able to really, truly be who God created them to be. And I think that's kind of that's that next level of fighting. I don't like to use the word fighting, but for definitely
striving or battling. Yeah, I got you.
For justice.
Okay.
I think acknowledging that there are people, like specifically for Rexdale, acknowledging that there are people who've been hurt in this church, or like that your brothers and sisters have been hurt, and maybe like I hope that like after this conversation it would like strike you up to make a phone call that that is your brothers and sisters and say, oh my goodness, like if they called Denise and said, I had no idea that this is what you went through, or a section or whatever, right? Like but like that would start the conversation. So acknowledging that there need to be acknowledging what we've been through, or what Black people have been through, and how they can help, right? to move forward. Because I think, I don't know if these I've noticed lately more conversations have been happening, or like we've been getting phone calls, right? So it's like, whoa, where's this coming from? But
So
yeah, like,
can I interrupt for a second there?
Yeah.
I guess I already did. I'm going to interrupt for a second there. So more conversations are happening.
yeah.
On the one hand, hey, that's progress. On the other hand, that's platitudes. Like, that's not action. Where do you guys land on that? Conversations is, and like, hey, we're talking about it. Is that like, hey, progress? Or is it like, yeah, great, talk is cheap?
I think it's how you come at it. Like if you were to call me and like I need a checklist of how I can help the Black community, like that's gonna rub me the wrong way, one. But also, like, I feel like you're not
Noted.
getting the point. But for my example, my friend Joel, we were driving up to a cottage and he's like, can I ask you a bunch of questions? And he was just asking just because he wanted more knowledge to understand what I go through and how to like support me and how to even pray for me to God and like be my advocate of like how can this happen to one person so many times kind of thing. Like, Lord, like please like intervene. Like I need you to come down and just like be his shield kind of like to have that kind of passion for your neighbors. Even if you don't go out and pick it, but like that kind of advocacy to God in that, I feel like is huge.
Colleen, is this progress or is this platitude?
So I also had a very good friend who is white ask that question or something along those lines. Like she asked, so why aren't there more Black families who are, the relationship, like they're married couples? I said, for me to answer that, I'd have to tell you how much of an impact slavery has had on the Black family. So when you had your family ripped apart, yes, it might have been hundreds of years ago, but it has permeated all the way down to the Black family that, men are just to procreate because that's how Black men were treated by the slave owners. And it makes me so emotional right now. But that's how Black men thought of themselves. They're only there to procreate. And hence, a marriage did not really mean much because you were just an object to be used for procreation. So even now, there's the cohesiveness of the Black family is not even there. There's a lot of work that has to be done for us as Black people and for the Black family.
Thank you for sharing that. Would you all agree with that? Okay, this is embarrassing. That's news. That's new information for me. Wow.
Yeah, one of the things I grew up struggling with the relationship I had with my dad because he wasn't around. I just built up like a rage and like anger towards him, and I had to figure out why. When me and Rachel started dating, and she would ask me about my family, I would get defensive and I would get angry and I just didn't want to talk about it. So I went to go see a psychiatrist, and she's like, you have to acknowledge the relationship with your dad is broken, and that your relationship with Christ will be affected by that. So as you grow in Christ, your relationship with your dad might not come back, but if you forgive him and reconcile, your relationship with Christ will grow. So I learned through that, with like just forgiving my dad, that he had different ways of thinking. Like you're a man if you have a lot of kids. So you can't really do that with one person like fast. So you got to go around and do that with a lot of people. So he wasn't really around. He didn't think that we needed him. These are the things that he told me. It's like, I'm like, yeah, I needed you. Like, there's things to this day I don't know how to do because I didn't have you to teach me not to do this or to do this. So yeah, all my uncles, like just that mindset, that culture of like, "You're not a man unless you just go out and have a lot of kids," affected us deeply. So yeah, that's one of the things I still struggle with is how do I not be that to my wife?
Well, and that ties directly back to slavery and the owners just wanting to basically increase their investment. Right. Wow. Can you guys help me understand the difference between being non-racist and being anti-racist? These are like, you know, a lot of people throw around the phrase, "Oh, I'm not racist." And now, you know, it's like, well, you need to be more than just non-racist. What is the difference? And I would argue, and maybe this is a privileged answer that is going to get discredited, which is fine. You can go too far into like a social justice warrior, everything that looks like me is wrong. You know, I'd like to think that that's too far. So where are kind of those phases or stages of non-racist, anti-racist, reverse racism almost? Who wants to give some insight there? Colleen, you or Denise, you came with notes, so I keep picking on you.
Okay.
But why don't you start us off? And shouldn't have come prepared.
Okay, so I did. Okay, so I would say here with that non-racist simply means that you disagree with the beliefs and behaviors associated with racism. However, an anti-racist means that it's an individual who's no longer willing to put up with racism and injustice, and it wants to evoke change. And so you can evoke change by educating yourself, by, again, depending on what your job is, advocating for others. Yeah. You asked that story. I have a good story that we can talk about later where someone of privilege was able to use that privilege to help another individual. It was a white man who helped a black preacher. And I mean, you know, you think of that impact, the kingdom impact that has had is enormous by one person standing up for someone else. That is an anti-racist because, you know, it's like, this is wrong and I'm going to do something about it. He wrote a letter and, you know, and as I said, I can talk about it later, but, or unless you want me to do it now, but it's an incredible story.
You know what? I'm curious. Tell the story.
So some of you may or may not know of Tony Evans. So Tony Evans is a preacher down south, and a lot of people would know of James Dobson, who started to focus on the family. So back in the 80s, Tony Evans wanted to, he's a black man, he wanted to start a radio ministry to be directed towards the black community because he saw how fragmented the families were in the US and he wanted. So he was told, and I have it word for word. He was told that African American speakers on Christian radio would offend too many of their donors and they could not take that risk. So this is what he was told. Wow. So Dr. James Dobson, they were dinner. Anyways, there's a long story of how that was connected. He wrote letters to these individuals, and all of a sudden Tony Evans is getting phone calls, and then he was asked to preach, and his now ministry, radio ministry, has been on the Urban Alternative, has been on the air for 40 years. He has, you know, an incredible ministry in the church, and he's written many books. But again, had James Dobson not stood in for him and been an advocate for him, where would his ministry be, right? He would still have his church, but that radio ministry would never have happened, or at least a lot later. So,
correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying the line there is James Dobson could have been saying, oh, that's wrong, they should let you on the radio, and that's non-racist, right. But anti-racism was actually picking up the pen, putting his name to the paper saying, this is wrong and you need to fix it. Is that like the actual action and doing something, getting into the conversation is where we get into like the actual anti-racism, the making progress? Is that, am I interpreting this correctly?
Oh, absolutely, I would agree. And I think if you look at all the stories of anyone who's made in history, like even with Martin Luther King, like all these people who made major changes, there were people of influence in the white community who stood behind them. Slavery ended, again, because there was white and blacks who worked together, who again stood up for those because they have the privilege and they used it in a positive way. And that's what we need in order to go forward, is working together. Don't come and tell me what needs to happen. You don't know the story, but work with me and work together, and then we can make change.
Okay, thank you for the story, and we'll get to more about kind of allies and stuff here in a few minutes. But back to non-racist, anti-racist. What other thoughts or ideas or comments would you guys add to this?
Non-racist might just be like the ignorance. Like you were brought up not thinking there's no racism in Canada, and you just are shocked when someone says, and it's like no, that doesn't happen. Or if someone says to me or to someone, I don't see color. Like to me, that one hurts the most, because you're basically saying everything that happens to you, Seth, because you're black, is not a thing. Like it's not because you're black those things happen to you. There must be other reasons, and just throwing my emotions and how I felt and all those just away because you don't see color as a non-racist.
Okay. Colleen, anything on this one?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Stetson said there. Sometimes, like white people don't actually, it's because we haven't really shared the story. We haven't had a chance to share the story. Why you have people who consider themselves non-racist. They need to understand that these things are happening because of the color of our skin. Right? And so they think that, okay, I've never said a racist thing in my life, but your friend may have said it, and you might have either acknowledged it by saying something in agreement, or by just not even pretending that you didn't even hear what the person said. If you are non-racist, you will stand up and say that is just not right what you're saying there. That's my definition of racist, of non-racist and anti-racist.
Rachel, anything to add, or did we?
I think they all nailed it.
So this is kind of an unfair question, but I'm curious. If you had to kind of give it happens occasionally, it happens quite a bit all the time. How often do you feel that your response, your answer, your opinion is filtered through the fact that you are black? So Colleen was kind of just referring to this, where you haven't heard my story, and then Stetson, you saying oh, that's not why, and it just kind of discredits everything you're saying. Is that an occasional thing? Is that an all the time thing?
I mean, I heard Stetson literally tell a white person what he went through, and that white person it was as if it didn't happen to him. He didn't say it out, but he was still defending his white privilege. And that was hurtful, because it's okay, I'm just literally giving you examples of how I've experienced racism, myself, and you're my friend, and he wouldn't even acknowledge.
Yeah, thankfully it's rare, in my experience. These conversations have come up more since the Black Lives Matter movement just came through. So there's been more conversations, and thankfully not too many of them were, there still has been. There's no way that happened to you. How much of that story is real? Those kind of responses I would get when sharing some things. But not from everyone. So,
I'd say it's rare for me, but I would say there's more silence. Like I've got a lot of friends. I think in my experience, it's kind of different because I grew up in a mostly white neighborhood and went to schools that were mostly white, like everything. So, so it's a little different in that respect. So I think sometimes my friends actually don't even realize. I think they forget that because I'm Black, that I have actually had these experiences. They don't think they just don't realize it, and they don't even ask. And not that they don't care, but they don't. It's like, oh, okay, well, that doesn't really happen to you, or they don't really, just don't ask the questions. I think sometimes. So sometimes that's actually that's just as hurtful. Sometimes just ask me. Don't assume that you know kind of what my experience is just because you may have had one other friend who had this experience. Because each of our experiences are very unique and different.
Thank you for watching part 2 of the race conversation. Please look out for the final part coming soon. We hope that the vulnerability of our panel has inspired you to have conversations with your family and friends.